welcome aboard right now Frank Gaffney. He is the executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy, vice chair of the Committee on the Present Danger. Frank, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dylan. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. Good to be with you. What did you make of President Trump's signing of the law authorizing sanctions against China over the Hong Kong crackdown and his comments yesterday?
It was welcome, of course. It was a rare piece of legislation that was adopted unanimously in both the Senate and the House. So the outcome was certain, but it was really the anchor of a very important event, I think, at the White House, and in my estimation, the most important presidential address on China since Lyndon Johnson, because it was comprehensive in its, indictment of the Chinese Communist Party for what it has done over all of those years, over successive presidencies. And the president properly pointed out that much of the blame for that was at our doorsteps, at the doorsteps of specifically his predecessors, who turned a blind eye, Dylan, to what the Chinese were doing, and he went through a litany of things, from, the hollowing out of our industrial base, the use of the World Trade Organization to benefit the Chinese tremendously, the theft of our technology, using, among other things, telecommunications companies like Huawei and the China Unicom and so on, the plague from China, not least, and the cost that has entailed, and the buildup of our principal adversaries' military capabilities, which are, let's be clear, intended to harm our men and women in uniform and our strategic interests and perhaps our people as well. So in all of these respects, it was a tour de force, I think, and it most especially set the stage for what I personally believe is the decisive issue in this election season, and that is the contrast between his position, his attitude, his critique of the Chinese Communist Party, and the help that communist entity has received over the years from his opponent for the presidency, former Vice President Joe Biden.
Well, and given that, I guess a two-part question. So, A, would you expect to see this just be the beginning of a long series of speeches and statements and potentially laws and other enactments against China, given that it was so comprehensive? Is this just the beginning of that process? And if you could set up a little, compare and contrast. What would the next 4 years of our China policy look like with President Trump? What would the next 4 years of our China policy look like under, God forbid, President Joe Biden?
I not only hope that this will be the beginning of a full-throated effort to take to the American people the profound choice between these two candidates, but I think it's absolutely imperative that be done, Dylan. This is because Joe Biden's history, his personal engagement in enabling the threat we're facing from the Chinese Communist Party, is one of those pivotal choices, perhaps the most important of our time, because this party, this enemy in Beijing, is our times, as my old boss Ronald Reagan used to say, existential threat to freedom. And to your question, excuse me, what I think the president has clearly, indicated is that he believes we need a robust opposition to that Chinese Communist Party. He perhaps captured most succinctly in response actually to a question he received towards the end from one of the media folks about investing in Chinese defense companies This is a topic that Alex and I talk about a lot here. It's unbelievable, I think, to most Americans that their 401k plans, their mutual funds, their other investments, pension funds, and so on, may well be actually financing the threat from China that we're facing, whether it's defense companies, whether it's their telecommunications conglomerates, whether it's their human rights abusers. Some of these are companies that are actually sanctioned by our government. It's illegal to do business with them. But that's the sort of thing that Joe Biden would not only be quite favorable towards, he actually made it happen in his time as the point man on China during the Obama-Biden years. In specifically May of 2013, Dylan, he actually helped engineer a deal that enabled those Chinese defense companies, among many others, to have preferential access to our capital markets. They don't have to meet the same standards for accounting and transparency and governance and risk disclosure that American companies have to meet. Can you believe that? And the consequence of that is that some $3 trillion has migrated from our capital markets to China, making possible much of the danger that they currently pose to us. So this is a choice. Do you want more of that, this reckless underwriting and enabling of our time's existential threat to freedom, or do you want somebody who's going to say, we can't afford to do that anymore. We need to resist this threat, not make it stronger and more capable of taking us down?
I think, and we actually talked about this in the first hour of the show, I mean, making that link between Biden and China and showing stuff like that, because that thing you just mentioned, I don't think a lot of people know about that with the defense contractors and giving them special access and things like that. I don't think people know about that stuff at all.
And this is why it's so vital to have a chance to talk with you and Alex about it, and the work that Francis Martel and others at Breitbart do on this. It's absolutely imperative that we understand that it's up to us whether this problem is going to become vastly worse. The Chinese have in mind getting another $3 to $5 trillion out of our capital markets in the years ahead, and that's something that people on Wall Street are happy to do. Unless we have a president who's saying, no, we're not going to do that. And that's what this president is doing, and he's offered and promised in this comment to the press yesterday that there's going to be more actions taken to prevent that shortly. And that's hugely encouraging, and a choice I think that the public will strongly endorse.
What do you make of the South China Sea situation? Because we've come out and we've said that we don't recognize China's expansion and what they're trying to do there, but are we taking steps to militarily step up there? How do you see the South China Sea situation?
Yeah, this is a hugely important topic, and it's just again a symptom of what we were just discussing. The South China Sea is one of the most strategically important areas of the world. By some estimates, roughly $1 trillion in trade transits through those waters every year, much of it to and from the United States. The rest of it largely to friends and allies of ours, as well as, of course, to China itself. What the Chinese have done, Dylan, is they have staked out man-made bastion islands throughout those seas, which they have, despite promises that they wouldn't do it, surprise, surprise, they have fortified so that they can actually begin to determine who will use those waters unless they have the permission of the Chinese Communist Party. And you can bet that that will be increasingly restrictive for us and our friends and our interests. So what we have begun doing under this president, the Obama-Biden team, of course, gave it a pass. They let this buildup take place. They took the promises at face value that the Chinese wouldn't militarize these islands. But this president has started pushing back. The trouble is the difference between having bases in those waters and having ships or planes that can pass through them from time to time well, is the difference in, as Mark Twain used to say, between lightning and lightning bugs. You've got a flash in the pan capability. We've had 2 aircraft carriers demonstrating our commitment to the area, but those carriers can't stay on station indefinitely. And the Chinese, by the way, have gone to great lengths to make sure that they can sink those carriers, including from some of these fortified islands. So we're looking at a very dangerous situation that has gotten more dangerous because of the acquiescence, indeed, I would argue, the enabling of the Chinese by the previous administration. This one is doing what it can to sort of claw our way back, but in this area, as in so many others, and this is really what the work of our Committee on the Present Danger China is all about, and people can find out a lot more about it at presentdangerchina.org. But I just really commend to them all. We need to get smart on this, and we need to make really vitally important decisions, because public policy as well as our national security are going to depend on the choices we're making this fall, in this portfolio especially.
No question about it. Really, really important stuff. Frank Gaffney, the Executive Chairman of the Center for Security Policy, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Present Danger. Frank, excellent stuff, and you're absolutely right. This is the premier foreign policy issue going forward here, and it's tremendously vital in this election. Thanks so much for taking some time for us this morning.
Pleasure as always. Thank you, Dylan.